All right, assuming the speakers are on downstairs, this is last call. Come join us. Do what? Third last call. I know not everyone could stay today and join with us, so I'm really appreciative of all you who have chosen to do so. Just as we're seeking the Lord for the whole building, and just seeking the Lord in this process, we're having a lot more Sunday meetings than usual, not just the first Sunday fellowship. We do every first Sunday, but now we're throwing in some extras, and probably we'll be doing a few more in the coming weeks. So thank you for not only coming, but thank you for bringing good food and being able to fellowship. You probably noticed that I had put in if you did not, you still can, in the pastor's word this morning, kind of just an update where we are. Most of you know this. And we are tasking our building team side to just be looking at potential revisions as we have been working with banks and lenders and so forth to see exactly what we have available already. And so that information will still be coming down the pike. And with the finance side, they are also kind of looking at what we're able to do. But one thing that we from the finance side are agreed to is that whatever we do, and we know we have to do something, is we are going to have to look at how we're going to raise the funds necessary to build anything. And as we work through that process, I believe it was June, right? June, I saw you come in. I know you're here somewhere. There we go. Who had suggested that we would consider John Hessel. That was you, wasn't it? I was thinking it was you. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because when that was first, I think I've told you this, when that was first suggested, my thought was, no, we don't really need that. We can just do this. And because that's kind of my default, I default to let's do things as simply and directly as possible. To the positive, I already knew John. Some of you don't know, John actually interimed our church between Tommy Chapman, who was the pastor prior to me a long time ago, and then my coming. So was that about a year that you were here? And one thing I've told people before, I don't think I've ever said in John's presence, is how appreciative I was of that interim, because it's really hard when a guy comes in. You're not the guy that was there previously. You're going to do things different. Even though I came in those early years determined not to change anything, I changed lots of things, just inadvertently. But in talking to Kurt Boehm and others who were in leadership here at the time, they always went back and said, John prepared us for that. He told us, this guy is not going to be the last guy. This guy's going to do things differently. You got to let this guy come in as God leads him. And so, if I never expressed that before, I'm expressing it to you now. You did a really good job for our church during that time in that. And so then when we met with John back in December, I think it was, and he kind of walked through how it is he helps churches and to hear his heart to help churches navigate what is totally unknown area for most of us. How do you begin putting together the funding from within your own body? How do you help your people pray through what they are able to give, what they should give, so that they're seeking the Lord? How do you do this in a way you're not manipulating? Because that was my question. I've seen these things done in manipulative ways that I despise. And we just will never put you through that. And the more we talk to John, I realized that's not what he's about. He wants to lead us to seek the Lord and to walk through just some really wise steps in how you do this kind of thing. And so once we kind of walked through that, I said, I think it would be good. Our committee was unanimous. We should use John. We are a congregationally governed elder-led church, which means we're not going to say, okay, church, so here's how we're going to do it. We want you to be able to hear ask questions, and come alongside and say, well, we affirm the elders' leadership on this because we've heard it and we've been able to ask questions. So this is part of our desire to keep everything in front of you and to make sure you're hearing what's happening and you're understanding why we're doing, because I would believe it is simply wrong to treat you any other way. We are a family. We are, each individual sheep and members of Christ's body, and so we want to walk through these things together. Enough from me. I want to introduce John Hessel to you of John Hessel and Associates. Done this for many years. I'm sure you'll share with us. Retired now, but doing this semi-retired, right? Are you still interiming churches also?
No, I preach when I'm asked, but I'm not.
You preach when you ask, but you're not interiming anywhere anymore. So, brother, come and share with us, and we're ready to hear what you have to say.
My privilege, Scott, and thank you very much. And I appreciate your invitation to come. Something happened this morning. I had to step out for a little while. I was really looking forward to being here for all of your worship service, but I did slip in later in the service. My, you are a crowd. I think I got the last seat available when I slipped in the back door. And so I congratulate you and I rejoice with you in what God is doing in the life of your church. And I was very pleased when I received the call and the invitation to come and talk with your committees. And I've had several conversations since then with Mike Booker. I'm sorry Mike's not able to be here today, but he has kind of brought me up to speed on some of the issues that you have been dealing with. And my role today is simply to give you a brief introduction and then to answer questions that you may ask before you make a decision about doing a capital stewardship campaign. I would never presume to stand here and say you ought to do a campaign. No, you ought to do exactly what God leads you to do. And if a campaign is the way he leads you, then I rejoice with you. It would be my privilege to serve you. But if not, I understand. And so I just want to share some information and then answer questions that you may have to help you as you seek the Lord's leadership. You'll notice John Hessel and Associates began in 1995. Prior to that, and while I was the interim pastor here, I was employed by the Southern Baptist Convention in the area of capital stewardship, or they called it capital fundraising. It really is capital stewardship, and so I prefer that term. But in 1995, I left the agency, went back into a local pastorate, and I started my own firm. And I've been doing that as a parallel ministry ever since. 3 years ago, I retired after 56 years of pastoring, and I'm still a member at First Baptist Oakville right down the road, but I continue to do capital stewardship when I'm invited, and I appreciate very much the invitation here. You'll notice I call it the ministry of capital stewardship because I approach it from a ministry point of view rather than a business point of view. It is not about fundraising. It is about helping folks to embrace a vision and choosing what they give. There's a proverb. Brad, if we can proceed to the next slide. There's a proverb with an axiom. Perhaps you're familiar with that verse in Proverbs 29, where there is no vision, the people perish. But there's an axiom to that, and that is where there are no resources, the vision perishes. And I wish I could tell you how often I've gone to churches through the years and see a real pretty architect's rendering of a new building that they dreamed about, prayed about, hoped for, and then never built, simply because there were no resources available to make it happen. And so if we go to the third slide, I have found through the years and have appreciated the fact that capital stewardship is a very biblically based tool to help a church move from vision to reality. And by the way, the church that you're seeing there is First Baptist Church of St. Clair. It was my privilege to work with them in 2 campaigns to see that building come to reality. So I want to take just a minute and share a verse of Scripture with you. This is from Paul to the Corinthians. And some of you will know that in 2 Corinthians, Paul was writing to them to encourage them to give a relief offering for the church in Jerusalem. And the way he went about it gives us a pattern that we follow in capital stewardship today. And here's what he said, and I'm sure it's familiar to many of you. He says, "Now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches of Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. For I testify that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord, begging us with much entreaty for the favor of participating in support of the saints. And this not as we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. And so as Paul writes to the church at Corinth, he holds up the Macedonians as an example. And he gives us a couple of insights here. He says that they were a persecuted church, but they still had joy. The world says you can't do that. They did. They also were an impoverished church by Paul's estimation. And Paul says, yet they were a very generous church. A lot of folks assume if you're not wealthy, you can't be generous. Jesus held up the widow's mite as an example of generosity. Generosity is not an amount, folks. It's an attitude. And Paul was commending the attitude of the Macedonians that they had joy in the face of affliction and that they had generosity in the face of poverty. And he said when they did, they not only gave from their provision, they gave from God's provision. Because they not only gave what we expected, they gave even beyond what they expected they would be able to do. And then Paul gives us the clue, the key to the whole thing in the 5th verse, when he says they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. And so as we think about a capital stewardship campaign, bridging that gap, a typical campaign would be in 3 parts. And if we have that slide, it starts with a preparation phase, and then a communication phase, and then a commitment phase. And very simply stated, during that 5 to 6 weeks of preparation, we're training folks, we're getting information together, but the most important thing we're doing is laying a foundation of prayer. Why would we do that? Well, anytime a church attempts something on the scale of what you're considering, it needs prayer. And if I can't get an amen on that, I can't get an amen. We just need God's help, and we all agree on that. But the second thing is that for a Christian, giving ought to be a spiritual issue before it's a financial one. See? And so when we approach it in a capital stewardship campaign, we don't approach it from the position of trying to tell people what they ought to give. We trust them and God to work that out. We talk about what they'd be giving for, and we talk about why to give, and sometimes we suggest ways that they might not have thought of, how they could give, but what they give remains between them and God. And so it's important that they start by praying about their giving. And so we ask them to do that. During the communication phase, we're casting the vision, what your church is endeavoring to do. And I thought Scott did such a commendable job, the part of the message that I got to hear this morning, in casting that vision for you, helping you to grasp and understand not just the attractiveness, but the importance of what you're considering doing. That as you consider your means, as you consider your ability, as you consider your needs, but most importantly, as you consider what God is doing in the body of Christ called Rockport Baptist Church for the future, is just vital to pursue. And so during the communication phase, during those 4 weeks with sermons and other media, other ways, we cast a vision. What is it that God is calling us to do? And then the commitment phase is simply a response phase. And we ask each family, after they've prayed about it, after they've had 4 weeks to hear about it, talk about it, pray about it, then to make a decision. With God's help, my family will give X amount over the next 3 years, over and above our tithe and other offerings. Now, a capital campaign gift is to be an over and above gift. And that's important because those of you on the finance committee would probably give me an amen here. If you split your tithe between the budget and the building, you've not solved a problem, you've created one. And that's just the honest truth. So whatever you might be able to give over and above, over a 3-year period, is what you would put on a commitment card that you would turn in, and it would be kept very confidential. Only one person would ever see that card once you complete it. And the only purpose for seeing that card is to tabulate a total, to report back to the church. Collectively, our church family has said over the next 3 years, we would be willing to commit and give X amount of dollars. Now, the reason that's important is because up to this point, as you've talked with designers, as you've talked with contractors, as you've talked with lenders, Everything you have financially is in supposition. We estimate, we think about. The capital campaign gives you a measurable entity. Our people have said over the next 3 years they will give X amount. And that's a concrete figure that you can then build upon as you create a financial plan for your project. Now, there are some factors that affect your results, obviously. We can have the next slide. I've just listed some of the more obvious ones. The nature of the project. New worship space is the easiest thing to raise money for in a New Testament church. And I think part of the reason is because it is worship. It's between you and God. But part of it is because worship touches virtually every part of your body life as a church. And so, typically, churches that are raising money for new worship space can raise 2 to 3 to sometimes 3.5 times their income. It depends on the individual church, quite honestly. Depends on the giving ability of the congregation. You can't give what you don't have, and you didn't need me to come down here to tell you that. But we ask people to give according to their means. Support for the project. If your congregation votes 60% to 40% to go forward with the project, you're not going to be excited about giving money for it, and that's just obvious. So having everyone on board to really share the vision and making it a congregational decision is valuable and essential. And then finally, confidence in the leadership. Now, confidence in your pastor. If you haven't come to that by now, folks, you got to catch up, okay? 30 years ought to be long enough for anybody, okay? But it's your committee leadership as well. When someone stands up here and says, folks, we're going to spend this many $100,000 on this project, you just want and need to know that they know what they're talking about. And so to those of you who are on the building design committee or on the finance committee or working in other aspects of this, it's important to do your homework. It's important to let folks know that you have researched as you need to, that you haven't cut any corners, and that you have all the information you need to make a wise choice and to give effective leadership to this congregation. Now, the benefits, and forgive me for going so fast, but I want to respect your time. The benefits of a campaign, and I categorize them 3. Spiritual benefits first. One of those benefits is it creates unity within the congregation around a shared vision. As folks have this common goal to work toward, it just naturally draws them together closer to each other. But there also is stewardship growth in the life of a church. At its heart, a capital campaign is a stewardship campaign. It uses the same scriptures, the same biblical principles that you would use if you were teaching people to give to your budget. It simply applies them in a different way to the purpose of the capital campaign. The financial benefits, and think about this for just a moment. If you borrow $1, it takes 3 of them to equal 1 given dollar. You understand that? Because at 7.5% interest, you will pay for that borrowed dollar 3 times over the life of the loan. A given dollar, you don't have to pay back and you don't pay interest on. So that's the value of given dollars over borrowed dollars. Now, given the scope of your project, I anticipate you may very well need to do both. But the given dollars become that much more valuable than the borrowed dollars. Another financial thing is that you've saved the cost of the building just in the interest that you would pay. If you calculate that out over 15 or 20 years, you'd be surprised. I met with a church years ago, and they told me what they thought their building was going to cost. And they said, well, we don't need to raise any money. The bank said we could borrow all the money we needed. And I said, oh, so you're building, and I think at the time it was going to be like $1.5 million. I said, so you're building almost a $5 million building? They said, oh, no, we can't afford that. I said, yes, you can, because that's what you're going to pay when you run to the bank and borrow $1.5 million. It's going to cost you that much more. The point being, there are financial benefits to doing a campaign. Finally, there's the practical benefit. A capital campaign helps to mobilize your congregation, to bring people together around a common purpose and a shared vision, and it helps to motivate them to do together what none of them could do by themselves. And so it is that unity of the body, that sharing of the vision, that combining of your resources that God uses to give you the means to move forward with what he's laid on your heart. Okay, just a couple of other things. And the next slide suggests that you need to develop a financial plan. And that's what your committees are doing. And their invitation to me to be with you today is a part of that. Again, as I said at the beginning, I can't tell you it is God's will for you to invite me to do a capital campaign. But I think it's a wise choice, and it's a very biblical way. And if you invite me to do it, I assure you it will be my privilege. By the way, you may or may not know, it wouldn't be my first campaign with Rockport Baptist Church. When Tommy was here, we did a campaign. And so that was, I don't know, back would have been in 87, 88 maybe. But anyway, just to let you know, so your church has had a capital campaign at some point in the past. But you need to develop a financial plan. And so you need to determine your potential. You need to find your borrowing capacity. How much are we going to need to borrow? How much can we afford to borrow? Measure the project affordability, and then finally establish a workable plan. And I don't know if you can read it at the back, but I want to read to you. The bottom of the page, I've added, remember, a capital campaign is not designed to tell you if you should build, but to demonstrate how you can. It is simply one tool that can help you to accomplish your objective. And then finally, and this addresses, Scott, what you shared a while ago, and I appreciate your honesty there. Why use a consultant? Why use someone like myself to do it? At the bottom of the page, once again, fundraising is different for churches than for other kinds of institutions. So also, capital stewardship is different than other types of stewardship programs in a church. My dentist has been my dentist, 25 years, and really nice guy. In fact, he was my granddaughter's Sunday school teacher over at First Baptist Arnold. And he's smart, but he's not smarter than me. And so I went in there and he did a root canal for me. You know what a root canal costs? I thought, there is no way he's worth that much. I went online, and did you guess? I found the tools he used. I could buy my own drill. I could buy my own little files to go in there and dig out those. I'm as smart as he is. If he can do it, I can do it. Well, you know where that story's going, see. Some things are just too important and in a way too sensitive. We need somebody that really knows what they're doing. Over the years, God has allowed me to be involved in over 250 capital campaigns. I have the years of experience and the expertise that has allowed me to glean, and it simply helps me to help you do a capital campaign more efficiently, more effectively, and therefore more successfully than you would do by yourself. If you search online, you'll find, and this is not my quote, this is coming from the larger corporations in the industry. If you use a professional consultant, you'll raise twice as much money as you'll raise in a capital campaign that you do yourself. Now, you may sit there and say, he can't be worth twice as much as what we could do. You can get a book on capital stewardship. I know you can read, you can learn. You can do your own capital stewardship campaign. Had a fellow down in Fort Leonard Wood, church down there, tell me one time, we don't need a consultant. We can do our own capital campaign. And I said, well, I apologize, but you do need a consultant. The question is not if you need one, it's who it's going to be. Because if I'm not going to be your consultant, someone else has to be. Because someone has to do the designing, the planning, the calendaring, and the leading of a capital campaign. They have to know what to do and when to do it and how to do it. And I would not do anything in your church that you could not do yourselves. There are no magic potions in a capital campaign. I don't know any secret formulas that I'm going to trick you into doing something you don't really want to do. You wouldn't want me here if I did. The point is, I won't do anything that you couldn't do. You simply have not had the opportunity to learn how to do it. And so I can do it more efficiently and more effectively, and it does make a difference. It's like the root canal. Some things are sensitive enough and important enough, you just want somebody to do it that has been there and knows what they're doing. And so that's what I offer to you. is a degree of objectivity, as you see listed there, expertise, sensitivity, the materials that I provide. If you employ me for a capital campaign for your church, you will not be doing the campaign that you did back in 1988 when Tommy Chapman was the pastor. Because when we sit down together to plan your campaign, we will design a campaign for Rockport Baptist Church. When I did that campaign in 1988, I did a campaign, and we were talking earlier with Harold, as I did the campaign here, I also did one at First Baptist Festus, Crystal City. Now, at that time, they were a good bit larger than you. And guess what? We used exactly the same manual and exactly the same methods for both of your churches. That was not wise. But that's what I was taught to do, and that's what the denomination required of me. When I started my own company, I realized every church is unique, and therefore every church needs to design a campaign that fits their church, how they do church, and what the vision is that they're doing a campaign for. And so if you choose to hire me, the very first thing is I would sit down with your pastor, your staff, your leadership, and we would design a campaign for Rockport. Then I would proceed to design the materials, to create manuals of leadership and training materials necessary to lead your campaign. The next thing we do is sit down and look at your church calendar, commitments you already made, like the first Sunday fellowship luncheon that you'd have. The last thing I'd want to do is design a capital campaign that would interfere with that in some way. So the point is, we would design a campaign that would complement your church calendar rather than compete with it. And then the last thing is that I would do is literally walk you step by step through every step of the campaign, which normally takes about 3 months. There's never a time when I would hand you instructions or hand you a manual and say, here, read this and learn how to do it. That's my job, to come and guide you literally step by step through the entire campaign. That's what I would offer to you. Now, let me stop, and you've been very patient to listen to me. Allow me to listen to you as you may have questions.
Hello? Hi.
Oh, yes, sir. Sorry.
Right now, the way I understand it, and I may be wrong, that we have a partial plan about what we want to do. And it's basically, you talked about having a plan and having a workable plan. Mm-hmm. Would you recommend that we wait to do the campaign until we get a workable plan about what we want to do as far as the kind of building we want to build?
Well, Mike and I have talked about that, and I assume, in fact, there was one evening not too long ago that he actually called me in the evening, put me on speakerphone with a committee. So I'm not sure who all was in that room when we had that conversation. The point is, if I understand correctly, your church has already decided we need to build. Now, the details of what we need to build are not specific yet. That's still being worked out. But one of the things that you know is whatever you build, you're going to need capital. The longer you put off doing a capital campaign, the longer you put off being able to have hard figures to work with a lender, with a contractor, to get started with the building. The longer you put it off, the more it's going to cost. And so I have worked with churches, and what they could say was, we're going to build a building. I worked with one church that was going to relocate. They hadn't even bought a piece of property yet. But they said, we don't even have enough money to go to an architect or to a lender and borrow the money for a property. We need to raise money first. So the point is, it's not that you have to have certain ducks in a row before you do it. Obviously, the more information you have, the better, but it's not essential.
I got a couple here. So you said the timeline's about 3 months?
I'm sorry?
You said timeline's about 3 months?
It depends on what the church designs as a capital campaign, but that's typical, yes.
Okay, if it goes longer than 3 months, is that additional cost from your standpoint, or?
No.
Is that fixed?
I'll charge a fee to your church, and I've already quoted what that fee would be.
Okay.
And that would not change. Nor does it change based upon the amount of money that you raise in the campaign.
Sure.
I'm not charging according to a percentage of what you raise. It's a flat fee, and I had quoted a fee of $9,500. That would be reduced to $9,000 if you paid it up front.
Okay, and you said you've done campaigns before. Is this a larger one than you've done, or a smaller one, or about right in the middle, or?
I'd say it's probably in the middle.
Okay. So you had the 3 steps where you had the prep phase, com phase, commitment phase, right? But before that, you said embrace the vision. So what's your definition of a vision?
My definition of a
Yeah,
vision?
when you say, hey, what's the vision? Is that just building, or is that, what's included in the vision?
Okay. Well, let me add something first.
Okay.
When a church has a vision to build and they do a capital campaign, the motivation for the capital campaign is not giving, it's investing. Now, think about that for just a moment. If you're doing the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, you give a gift. That's a donation. When you do a capital campaign, donation is not the motivator, investing is. When people invest, typically there are 3 questions that need to be answered. Number 1, what am I investing in? New worship center. Exactly how it's going to look or how big it's going to be is yet to be answered, but that's where we're going. The second question that's usually asked is, what are the dividends of my investment? And in your case, that's illustrated in this room. The people that continue to come to your church that God brings to add to the body. The third thing is that people will say, before I invest in this, I want to know it's a wise investment. Who are the other investors? And so part of the value of a capital campaign is it challenges people by example. And so, for example, when we do a capital campaign, we ask 20% of the members of the church, typically the leadership, the staff, the deacons, other key leaders in the church, to make their decision first, to offer an example to the rest of the church. Just like Paul did when he offered it to the Corinthians. Consider what the Macedonians did. And so the point is, when you do a capital campaign, you're asking them to give to the vision, okay? But you're asking them to do more than just donate. You're asking them to invest.
Sure. In these questions, I'm sorry if they're kind of basic or whatever, but this is my first capital building project thing being involved in. So the question is with the vision, because part of the communication phase is you said you have to communicate the vision, right? Mm-hmm. So my question is the vision just the building, or is the vision part of, this is the ministry plan, right?
Okay.
And do you help craft that? I know that doesn't sound real good, but do you help develop that ministry plan or that vision?
I can certainly offer that if the church doesn't already have it. Short answer, the vision must go way beyond the building.
Right.
God didn't call Rockport Baptist Church to build more buildings.
Right.
God called Rockport to reach people and to build disciples.
Okay.
And so the building is not an end, it's a means to an end. And anytime the building becomes an end in itself, you've lost track. Right. So that's what I would say. But I'd like to let Scott respond to that too.
So vision is what I've been doing the last 3 weeks. And next week. It's not all we're going to do. So the vision is, who are we as a church and what has God called us to do? And in light of that, what do we need to do at this moment to be faithful to that, right? So we're not starting with coming up with a vision statement, or we're going to come up with some brand new vision thing. We're trying to clarify what we're called to be as a church. That's the vision. And that's what we'll focus on. Everything I've talked about the last 3 weeks, with the building being a tool that is part of how we keep that vision, right? Or not.
Or expand it, right? Or how does the building help us with that vision? Right?
Exactly. You and I talked about that.
Yeah. So during the communication phase, is there going to be sessions where the building discussion and vision discussion are all talked about? I mean, or is it just, what does that communication phase look like? Does that make sense?
Well, it communicates on several levels. God blessed my wife and myself with 3 daughters. And very early in our family life, I learned that I could not communicate with all 3 girls the same way and get the same response. And church people are the same way. If we only communicated one way or we only communicated one time, we wouldn't get the message through to 2/3 of the people. And so we communicate through the pastor's messages, we communicate through personal testimonies, we communicate through electronic or printed media to help share the story. And again, the vision is not the building.
Right.
And let me say one thing, and this is I, John, speaking to you. If and when you build a new building, that is not the most important thing that Rockport Baptist Church is going to do. Did you hear that? And I'll say amen if you don't. Okay? It's not the most important thing you're going to do. If you choose to do a capital campaign, whether with me or someone else or by yourselves, that's not the most important program you're going to do at that time, because that's not the vision. God has not called your church to build a building. God has not called your church to raise money. God has called your church to reach people. The money is simply a means to the building. The building is simply a means to the ministry. The vision has to be about the ministry.
And in answer to your question, yes, I mean, we've got the 2 committees working now, and as we move toward refining how that works out, we're going to want input. There are going to be means and ways for our people to give input, to discuss what that looks like, if I'm hearing what you're asking.
Yeah, because a lot of times sometimes we think we're one and done, right? So we had a meeting on that, but there's other questions, and how do we keep getting that feedback and having forums where people can keep asking questions, right?
Right,
So
that's what we're trying to do, yes.
Yep. Okay. So, John, you mentioned that something on one of your slides you had success, that if you do a capital campaign, you're going to be more successful.
Well, that's not guaranteed.
Well, down to the bottom, it just says success. And I guess my definition is, what is
based on what I provide, the objectivity, the sensitivity, the expertise,
Yep.
and so on, ultimately should lead to success. And I have a very good track record, but it's not
success
guaranteed.
What is your definition of success there?
In my definition, it's measurable. Whatever the financial goals are for the campaign, if I'm able to help you reach those goals, that campaign has been successful. Now, again, the campaign is not an end. The money you raise in the campaign is not an end. All of that still represents a means to a much greater end. But for me, that's a measurable entity. And so when we do a campaign, we would set 3 financial goals for your church. And I say we because I don't set those goals. Your leadership team in the campaign would set those goals.
Okay.
And then our results are measured by whether or not we reach them.
Okay. So your definition of success is that you reach the financial goals that you're shooting for.
Well, it really goes beyond that, in my mind, simply because raising the money is not the only thing. I want the money to be raised in a way that maintains the harmony of the church and strengthens the unity of the church. I never want to do anything in a capital campaign that Scott has to repair when I'm gone.
Gotcha. And I'm kind of nibbling around this question, is that have you ever been in a campaign that they decided not to build, right? Or is the objective, we are building something and that's success, that something definitely gets built?
Well, I've been involved in a few campaigns, fortunately not many, where the church simply had a pipe dream for a goal and couldn't reach it. I shared, I think, in a conversation earlier, was talking with a pastor. They were running 120 in worship. And they decided that his vision for the growth of their church, that they would be running 1,000 someday. And so he put together a committee, and they decided, we're going to build a worship center for 1,000 people. They had not pondered what it would cost to build it, number one. They had not pondered what it would cost to maintain it, number two. They hadn't even pondered what it would cost to heat it, while 150 and with growth 175 and 200 and 300 and 400 people would look like in an auditorium built for 1,000. I mean, for a while, they'd look like BBs in a barn. And so in that case, yes, they did a capital campaign and realized that what they were dreaming was just that, a dream.
And I'm trying to see how your role would be in this. So the objectivity there is to say, hey, listen, after all the commitment phase, you get a number, and you're looking at this number versus that number, meaning the loaning number, and you're going, this is blood and trying to get blood out of a turnip. There's no way. Is that advise and consent type of role too, where you go, guys, what you are looking to do, based on my experience and my objectivity, this just doesn't look like it can happen?
Okay, my expertise is limited.
Okay.
And there are areas that I choose not to involve myself in the life of the church. So I trust the committees of the church to be doing the work that they're doing, coming to the point where they want and need a capital stewardship campaign. If I'm asked along the way, one thing you always get from a consultant is an opinion.
Right.
And I'm willing to offer an opinion. In fact, and I had shared this with Mike Booker in one of our telephone conversations, that when I first met with your committee back in the fall, and they announced that you were considering a $3 million building. Now, I don't know who gave me that figure, whether it was with Mike or with someone else, but anyway, I got that figure in my mind. And when I looked at your income, that's over 10 times your annual income. My consultant's mind says that's not possible. But my believer's mind says it's not my place to tell you that's not possible. That's God's business, see? And so when we do a capital campaign, I'm assuming and I'm trusting that not just your pastor, not just your leadership team, not just the committee, but the congregation has prayed about what God is leading you to do, and you're seeing a capital campaign as a tool to help you achieve it. Now, one benefit of a capital campaign that you touched upon, and that is sometimes churches simply over-expect what they'd be able to borrow or even what they'd be able to raise. And when they do a capital campaign, as I said earlier, you get concrete numbers. So they're not assumptions, they're not suppositions, they're not estimates. You get a measurable figure of what your people said they would give over the next 3 years, and you can take that to a bank and use that as part of your loan application. So that's the benefit of it. And unfortunately, there may be a time when a church, after doing a capital campaign and finding out how much they can or can't borrow on top of that, simply says, okay, we need to revise our plan. We need to phase our plan. We were talking earlier about Peace Lutheran Church. If you're familiar with that, if you go up to 255 and start west, it's a big Lutheran church on the right side on the service road, okay? I've done 5 capital campaigns with that church. They did a campaign to build a family life center. They did a second campaign to pay for it. They did a third campaign to buy property. They did a fourth campaign to get some seed money for a new worship center. They did a fifth campaign to finish paying for the worship center. So what you can accomplish in a single campaign or with a single loan or in a single, you might be able to phase your project in 2 or 3 phases. There are a number of ways that you can bring your project within financial viability to your means and ends. But that's not my decision to make for you. That's your decision to make under God's leadership.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Miss Janet over here.
Yeah, you said earlier that when you saw that a $3 million was what was thought about.
Sorry.
Okay, when you said earlier about a $3 million estimate was not feasible, have you consulted with any of the team members? I'm not on any of those meetings, as to what you think would be feasible for Rockport, the way our budget is at this time? Have you expressed to them?
Based on your budget, and these are industry figures, these aren't my figures, but the financial industry says you can borrow 3 to perhaps 3.5 times your income. With an income of just under $300,000, that looks like between $800,000 and $900,000 roughly, okay? In a capital campaign, if you're building if you're raising money for a new worship center, as I said earlier, that's the easiest thing to raise money for. And typically 2 to 3 to sometimes 3.5 times your income. There's another $800,000, $900,000 potentially that your church might be willing to give from your membership through a capital campaign. The problem is the bank will tell you exactly what they'll loan you. We can't tell you exactly what you can raise in a capital campaign until you do the capital campaign. But there's a safety valve in that, and this goes back to your question earlier. Doing a capital campaign, if your vision for a building is outside of your means and is just not reasonable within your resources, doing a capital campaign is a very inexpensive way to find that out. It's much better to find it out that way than to find it out after you've gone to the bank and got money and broke ground on a building, get halfway into it, and find out we don't have enough money to finish it. And so that's one of the, again, going back to the benefits of a capital campaign. A capital campaign gives you hard figures that you can use as a guide to what you can do. If a church calls me and says, we want to build a building and it's going to cost beyond 5 to 6 times our annual income, they're telling me that's going to be questionable. And why it's questionable is if you can raise 3 times your income and you can borrow 3 times your income, that's only 6 times. If you're building something 7 or 8 times your income, it's going to take a special effort to do that.
And partial answer to your question too, Janet. Mike has talked to you a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And
several times.
That was one of several factors, including things that we had learned in talking with banks, that has led us a couple of weeks ago to revise down, right? And now to tell our building team, we want to look at plans that fall within that revision down, because the last thing we want to do is be foolish, right? And so that's why we're trying to do so much on the front end here. Just like he said, I was really surprised it was you or someone, it was the bank that told us there's people that actually do all this stuff and they think what they're going to build before they even talk to a bank.
That's true.
And they say, oh, well, we need $2 million. And the bank says, you're not going to get more than $800,000. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to do that kind of foolishness. That's why we're trying to be as much possible on the front end and to get the information that we need to really have an idea. Okay, Lord, how are you going to do this? What are you going to do? What are we able to do as you're leading us?
Okay. Anything else? Oh, yes, sir.
Is it on? I've heard a workable plan, and I've heard a financial goal. I don't think we've said that yet. We haven't given a workable plan, and we haven't given a financial goal. So, one, should we do the campaign when we don't have those things? And 2, when do you start to give the money? In other words, if we have a campaign and we say we can raise this much money, and do we wait until we get the workable plan and how much it's going to cost before we start to give it?
Well, I would assume before you would do a capital campaign that some measure of a workable plan is already in place. That may need to be revised or altered some ways along the way, and there's opportunity to do that. But the thing is, when you have at least a basic plan in place and you do a capital campaign, the short answer to your question is giving typically begins within 2 weeks after the end of the campaign. So if you did a campaign in March, April, May, the giving would begin in June. And that's when the 3-year clock would begin to tick. And then you can go to your lender and say, we have done a capital campaign. And this is how much our folks have committed to give. And then the lender takes that into account in qualifying you for a loan.
And that's why we're pursuing these in parallel courses. That's why we're working with the building team and the finance team at the same time, is to be able to kind of to bring them together.
A capital campaign typically is a reasonable and safe first step in the process. Speaking from a financial plan, now not from a building plan, but from a financial plan. Again, it gives you some hard figures, some concrete information on which to build. And the reality is you don't have that just now.
Is there any incentive with the bank by using your services? Like, I know that that's 2 separate entities too, but just.
In 1985, when I moved to St. Louis to start doing capital campaigns for the Southern Baptist Convention, churches that I worked with would go to banks and would say, we've done a capital campaign. And the lender would say, what is that? If you go to most of the major banks in St. Louis today as a church to borrow money, one of their first questions is, have you done a capital campaign? And the second question is, was it professionally led? Now, I understand that Edgewater is only offering 50% credibility toward whatever you raise in a capital campaign. Most local lenders will go as high as 70, and I've known of some to go as high as 80%, because they understand the integrity of a capital campaign in a church. Okay, there is a hand back at the back.
I would just like to support what John was saying. We've talked to Water's Edge they're part of the Oklahoma Baptist Foundation, and then they also work with the Missouri Baptist Foundation. And they, in their application, they specifically ask, have you started a stewardship capital funding campaign? That's something they want to know. So he's exactly right. And as far as when we talked to him, he said that they would give 50% credit on the loan. So they gave us an amount that they would lend to us. And we haven't officially done the application, but we did a kind of we filled it out and we talked to him off the record, so to speak, until we get our plans more up to speed. But we wanted to find out, kind of get an idea of where we would be at in that process, and that's when he told us the amount that they would lend based on what we know now. In addition, he said that if we have a capital campaign, that number goes up. Furthermore, we're going to be talking with another bank, Kurt Baim and I are, this week, and one of the things they ask, and we have not done a formal application, but we're meeting with them for lunch, and one of the things he sent in a kind of a generic questionnaire, not a loan application, but a questionnaire is, have you or are you planning to start a capital campaign? It's a big deal. It's really important.
Thank you.
We will not in any way rush you. I know John does have somewhere he's going to need to go, so we've got about 10 more minutes that we could ask questions if you have them. You don't have to make them up if you don't, but if you have them.
While you're thinking about it, if I might hasten to add, number one, thank you once again for the invitation and even the consideration. Back when I started John Hessel Associates in 1995, my wife and I made a faith covenant with the Lord that I would never advertise, that the only way I would do capital campaigns is if someone came to me. And so, as you know, Mike or one of the other fellows, forgive me, contacted me. You've never received a circular. I've never cold called, said, hey, can I do a capital campaign for you? And the reason is I've always trusted that if God wanted me to do this, God would give me the opportunities to do it. So I am very, very grateful for the invitation to meet with you and for your consideration. And I want to say very clearly and very candidly, I'm very willing to work with your church, and I would consider it an honor and a privilege to assist you. But I would never tell you this is the way you ought to go. You need to let the Lord tell you if that's true. But be assured I'll be praying with you and for you as you make that decision. And if any of you get home and you think, boy, that's an important question, I wish I'd thought of that, pass it on to Scott. Scott will pass it on to me, and I'll be happy to answer any additional questions that you may have. Because my intent here is just to give you as much information as you need to discern what God is guiding you to do as a church. I understand the importance of that decision, and I genuinely will be praying for you.
Another thing you mentioned in our committee that was helpful is that at this point, since this is a semi-retirement thing, you don't have 5 churches you're working with.
No.
Yeah, go ahead and mention that.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any other churches right now. Now, to be fair, I'm talking with a couple of other churches,
right,
but nobody has made a decision. If you say to me in 2 weeks or whenever you make a decision, John, we've decided we want to use your service, when can you begin? The answer is immediately, if not sooner. That's just where I stand. Yeah. And by the way, if you don't know, I live less than 10 minutes down the street. When I stepped in before the service and learned what the format of this would be and that you had the PowerPoint, I just went back home and got one of my PowerPoint presentations to bring and got rid of my necktie. So anyway, so I live that close to you. So the point is, if you call me and say, hey, we have a problem, can you help us? I'm not going to say, well, let me see when I can get a flight. See, I live literally 10 minutes away from you.
Yeah.
John or Scott, sorry for my voice, but one question that I know, John, you mentioned something about this was a biblical issue when I first walked in. Can you, or Scott, going into debt, because we have many people here that don't believe to go into debt. We have many people that it is. Can you address the biblical stance on why we should go into debt for our building?
Well, I know some take the position that you should never be in debt. And some have tried to modify that and say, well, you should never be in debt for day-to-day things, but you do need to be in debt for capital things like a home or like a new car, things like that. People modify that in a lot of ways. Debt is simply the wise management of money. And if you think of a simple balance scale, and in one side of the scale, in one tray is time, and in the other side of the scale is money. And I've talked with churches that have said, well, we needed to start this building 3 years ago. We've got to get started, and if we need to borrow money to do it, we're going to do it, because time is more important than money. So they're going to pay some interest on the money they borrow in order to get the job done and to be able to fulfill the vision that they have. But I've also worked with other churches who have said, we don't want to pay any more interest than we absolutely have to. We're going to raise all the money in a capital campaign. And so I can give you a whole list of the 250 campaigns that I have done that have been repeat campaigns. There are probably 8, 9 churches that I've done as many as 4 or 5 campaigns with. So it's not what you can do in a single campaign. It's what you can do in a plan. And the plan may include a second or even a third campaign, so that you raise enough money to get you through the first phase, and then you do another campaign, and then you do another, and that's a very doable thing. So, you know, there are ways to approach that. I would never stand here and tell you, you ought to borrow money. But I will stand here and tell you that at the very least, you're most likely going to need some interim financing to get whatever you choose to build up. Because the longer you wait to build it, you are saving interest, but you're paying for inflation. Building costs go up 8 to 10% a year. So if you wait 3 years until all the money has been given to spend the money, it will cost you 30% more to spend it than it does right now. And I can give you a real quick illustration. If you're familiar with First Baptist Church Oakville, we've been in a construction project since last March. They're telling us, with luck, it'll be done by Easter. It was supposed to have been done by Thanksgiving, but okay. We are building a new welcome center. Desperately needed an elevator for our senior adults. They've been wanting that for 35 years. Desperately needed handicapped accessible restrooms, which we did not have. And we had 4 people in our church 4 years ago that were in wheelchairs. They couldn't even use our restrooms. So we were going to build a building that included a welcome center, a handicapped accessible ramp, an elevator, and handicapped accessible restrooms, and a high school gymnasium. And it was going to cost us $1.3 million. We committed to do that, and COVID hit. And I don't need to tell you what COVID did to a lot of plans. In the course of COVID, my wife died. In the course of COVID, I made the decision to retire from pastoring. The new pastor came. Well, he had to be here a year or so to get his feet on the ground before he was even ready to start talking about a building. We are now building. What we are building is just the welcome center, the elevator, the handicapped accessible restrooms, the ramp leading into the building. We had to cut the high school gym off because the welcome center is costing us more than the whole project would have cost us 4 years ago. Now, that's not a made-up story. That's a facts and figures story. Right. We hope to build the gym someday, but that'll be the next phase.
And that is, Billy, a good question. It's one that we will be addressing. The question of do you go into debt for something or not is not a biblical, the Bible is clear, yes, no question. It's a wisdom question. And it's the kind of thing where we have to address, and people do have different convictions about it. We would all agree that irresponsible debt is wrong. But most of the people here that own a home went into debt for that home because that's unfortunately just when you build anything of any size now, unless you're independently wealthy, that's just part of it. The question then becomes how you do that. And so we would see debt as a tool. Scripture doesn't say yes or no to debt in general. It does say a lot about how you would handle it. And as he said, if you say we're never going into debt, then that is actually more expensive than if you can use it wisely. But we do have different convictions here. We will be addressing that. That has to be addressed going forward. But our understanding is, I don't like debt. Don't like it at all. But I also understand that there is a right time and a right place for reasonable debt in order to accomplish a project of any size. But obviously, everyone has to deal with your own convictions on that. And in your own house too, right? How you handle, how you buy a house. So young people, don't go into foolish debt at all. But there is, you need to study and figure out when it is wise and how it is wise to undergo reasonable debt when the time is there. And we can have more discussions on these things later. Got a question here with Scott. They can't hear you back there. Oh, here comes Kyle.
I was looking, Scott. I couldn't remember.
Where you been?
I couldn't remember why you called me. I appreciate you sharing this.
I'm just clarifying that, to your point, he doesn't advertise at all. We got John from Genesis, who's just ahead of us in this process. They're breaking ground now. They have a congregation much like this one, and they raised $1 million. So it's important.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. I know this is another question with respect to the bank or nothing, but like, let's say somebody gets into like maybe inherits a windfall of money or whatever, and they decide that they want to give a substantial amount to the payoff of the building.
Praise the Lord.
Yes. But I'm just saying, so is there, I mean, there'll be details worked out, I guess, with whoever the lender is for like us not being penalized if that happens, or, like, do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
Sure.
I mean, okay.
If you borrow money from Edgewater, which is the Baptist Foundation of Oklahoma, there is no prepayment penalty. And we were debating that earlier, whether or not that would be true of a local lender. You'd have to ask them.
Right.
Some would treat it as a commercial loan, and so there may be some penalties involved. But you'd want to know that beforehand. Yeah.
And one reason we're looking at Edgewater, very much so, if we look at anybody, is because they are a, Oklahoma Baptist, Missouri Baptist organization who exists to help churches. In fact, their more restrictive amounts that they will loan is for that reason. They say, we're not in the business of getting churches in trouble.
Yeah.
We are for the churches. And so we are more restrictive in what we do because we want to be involved in situations where we're helping a church accomplish something, not foreclosing on churches because they overextended, and they just won't do that.
So I guess my other question is like, if, for instance, we, make extra payments, not like, maybe there's not, this windfall money, but if there's extra payments made on a yearly basis to pay the loan off early, that's also.
That's the kind of thing we would work out with a lender. It is true of them, but those are the kind of questions, those are the downstream questions we would have to ask.
So like
Right.
if we did a 30-year loan, but if praise the Lord, we paid it off in 15.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Most of those work well. I'm going to have Warren pray just because John has somewhere he's got to be. And if you have further questions, we will be providing opportunities for that. We want to answer questions. We want to keep everything in front of you. And we will be coming back to you with the question of using John here in a couple of weeks. I'll be sending something out on that. We'll let you know, because that'd be the first stage. Do we do something, and do we use John's? And we'll send something out on how that question will be answered definitively here in the next couple of weeks.
All right, let's pray. Father, these things are intimidating and can be exhausting for us, and yet you are not exhausted or intimidated by anything. We thank you that you own all things, that you own the cattle on 1,000 hills, that you speak to your people in Haggai and say, look, watch, and I will shake heaven and earth and cause the wealth of the nations to come down and to rebuild this temple, and you do it. You carry forward all your plans, and now we are just looking for you to clearly direct us so that we know what your plans in this situation are. Give us wisdom, give us grace, give us generosity, and an eagerness to follow you in all the things that you are doing. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
And thank you, John.
My privilege, yes. Thank you.